It's Friday, it's 12:15, and this is Politics UK. Welcome to your weekly roundup of parliamentary highlights from across the UK. I'll be joined by colleagues in Edinburgh, Cardiff and Belfast, and here in Westminster by our parliamentary correspondent Susan Hume. This week, after an official report details lockdown parties in Downing Street, Boris Johnson defends his leadership.
I know what the issue is. Yes, Mr. Speaker, yes. It's whether this government can be trusted to deliver. And I say, Mr. Speaker, yes, we can be trusted.
But not all Conservative colleagues are convinced.
I told him that I thought he should think very carefully about what was now in the best interests of our country and of the Conservative Party. And I have to tell him he no longer enjoys my support.
Levelling up, the Secretary of State publishes his plan.
This people's government is keeping faith with the working people of this country by allowing them to take back control of their lives, their communities and their futures.
After all the delays, all the slogans, all the big promises, is this it? Is this really it?
And in Wales, a row about who should pay to make coal tips safe.
You have the responsibility, you had the money and you had the choices to do it.
The UK government has a responsibility to put right the legacy that we have seen here in Wales, and they have refused to provide a single penny piece.
Let's start here in Westminster with Susan Hume. Susan, after a long wait, that much-anticipated report of sorts from the senior civil servant Sue Gray about parties in Downing Street and more widely across Whitehall, all going on when there were coronavirus restrictions in place. What did she say?
Well, we did wonder if we'd ever find out, because we had that fever pitch about when she might publish it. Then the Metropolitan Police said they were investigating, so any bits about law breaking would have to be left out, and some people said those would be the most interesting bits. However, we did get the report on Monday. And while there weren't a lot of new details in this partial report, it still made pretty tough reading for the Prime Minister, I think. So there were lines like a failure of leadership. There was talk about a culture of excessive alcohol, being drunk in the workplace, and also that people in Downing Street weren't keeping to the standards that were expected of the rest of the British public. And that's the difficult one, really, because the idea that people in government, working in government, weren't keeping to the rules that everybody else was at great personal cost and pain. So when the Prime Minister came to the House of Commons to present the findings, there was a really very raw and emotional outburst from one Conservative MP about his own personal situation. That's the kind of thing I think is very hard to forgive and forget for those people who have felt those losses. And I suspect the Prime Minister knew that he was in for a pretty bruising couple of hours, so he began with an apology.
Firstly, I want to say sorry. And I'm sorry for the things we simply didn't get right, and also sorry for the way that this matter has been handled. And it's no use saying that this or that was within the rules, and it's no use saying that people were working hard. Mr. Speaker, I get it, and I will fix it. And I want to say, to the people of this country, I know what the issue is. Yes, Mr. Speaker, yes. It's whether this government can be trusted to deliver. And I say, Mr. Speaker, yes, we can be trusted.
By routinely breaking the rules he set, the Prime Minister took us all for fools. He held people sacrificing contempt. He showed himself unfit for office. But, Prime Minister, the British public aren't fools. They never believed a word of it. They think the Prime Minister should do the decent thing and resign. Of course he won't, because he is a man without shame. And just as he has done throughout his life, he's damaged everyone and everything around him along the way.
The report does absolutely nothing to substantiate the tissue of nonsense he has just spoken. Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. Instead, Mr. Speaker, this leader of the opposition, a former Director of Public Prosecutions, Mr. Speaker, so he spent most of his time prosecuting journalists and failing to prosecute Jimmy Savile, as far as I can make out, Mr. Speaker.
What the Gray report does show is that Number 10 Downing Street was not observing the regulations they had imposed on members of the public. So either my right honourable friend had not read the rules, or didn't understand what they meant, and others around him, or they didn't think the rules applied to Number 10. Which was it?
No, Mr. Speaker, that is not what the Gray report says. It is not what the Gray report says. But if I suggest that she waits to see the conclusion of the inquiry.
The Prime Minister has told the House that all guidance was completely followed. There was no party. COVID rules were followed and that. I believed it was a work event. Nobody believed him then. And nobody believes you now, Prime Minister. That is the crux. No ifs, no buts. He has willfully misled Parliament. It's bad enough.
Order! I'm sorry it's come to this, and I'm sorry that the leader of the party has not got the decency to just withdraw those words in order that this debate can be represented by all political leaders. Under the power given to me by Standing Order number 43, I order the honourable member to withdraw immediately from the House.
I'm deeply concerned by these events and very concerned indeed by some of the things he has said from that dispatch box and has said to the British public and our constituents. When he kindly invited me to see him 10 days ago, I told him that I thought he should think very carefully about what was now in the best interests of our country and of the Conservative Party. And I have to tell him he no longer enjoys my support.
It seems a lot of people attended events in May 2020. The one I recall attending was my grandmother's funeral. She was a wonderful woman. As well as a love for her family, she served her community as a councillor and she served Dartford Conservative Association loyally for many years. I drove for 3 hours from Staffordshire to Kent. Only 10 people at the funeral. Many people who loved her had to watch online. I didn't hug my siblings. I didn't hug my parents. I gave a eulogy. And then afterwards, I didn't even go to her house for a cup of tea. I drove back 3 hours from Kent to Staffordshire. Does the Prime Minister think I'm a fool?
No, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my honourable friend, and I want to say how deeply I sympathise with him and his family for their loss.
When knocking in doors in Blackpool at the weekend, I spoke to Julie, who said this. This Prime Minister has had the most difficult job in living history. He's been dealing with a pandemic in which he nearly died. He's been dealing with the media who haven't forgiven him for delivering Brexit. And he hasn't had a chance to crack on and deliver yet for British people on their priorities.
Well, Susan, as you said, it was a pretty brutal session for the Prime Minister overall. And we saw the Speaker, Lindsay Hoyle, there intervening after the SNP leader at Westminster, Ian Blackford, accused the Prime Minister of wilfully misleading Parliament, which is against parliamentary rules. And the Speaker also intervened later about something else that was said that afternoon, which was Boris Johnson saying that the Labour leader, Keir Starmer, had failed to prosecute Jimmy Savile when he was a director of public prosecutions. What happened?
Yeah, there was a bit of a backlash about that comment, with even some Conservatives privately saying that they were quite uncomfortable with what they felt was a bit below the belt, a bit of a smear linking Keir Starmer, who used to be head of the Crown Prosecution Service, with Jimmy Savile. And the next day, the Speaker did intervene and said that he didn't want to hear comments that were likely to inflame opinion. And Keir Starmer, again, he came back later in the week saying that the Prime Minister seemed to be getting some of his ideas ideas from right-wing extremists on the internet. The Prime Minister at first kind of stood his ground, but after that it made some comment that he wasn't trying to link Keir Starmer personally with the failure to prosecute Jimmy Savile.
And of course then Prime Minister's questions on Wednesday, and the Labour leader Keir Starmer was of course keen to keep up the pressure on the Prime Minister, but he actually focused much of his fire and his questions to Boris Johnson on issues around the economy like taxation. What did you make of it?
Yeah, of course, the background political difficulties carry on around parties, and that trickle of Conservative MPs expressing publicly their lack of confidence in the Prime Minister. We had one, Tobias Ellwood, who's the chair of the Defence Committee and quite a senior figure doing that. But as you say, Keir Starmer focused on some of the other political difficulties, the cost of living issues, including rises in tax that are going to come into our pay packets come April. Now, there had been some rumours that the Prime Minister, the government, might decide to scrap that rise in national insurance tax that's coming in because of all the other pressures on people's budgets at the moment. However, at the weekend, the Chancellor and the Prime Minister teamed up to say publicly that that national insurance rise was going ahead because it was needed to pay for health and social care. However, they also said that they were low-tax Conservatives, and Keir Starmer had a bit of fun poking some fun at them for that.
One of the most absurd claims made on behalf of Operation Save Big Dog is the Prime Minister and the Chancellor writing in the Sunday Times that they are the tax-cutting Conservatives. Why do these alleged tax cutters keep raising taxes on working people?
Prime Minister.
Our COVID recovery plan is absolutely vital in helping people with the cost of living, lifting up universal credit payments, Mr. Speaker, by cutting the tax that people effectively pay, lifting the living wage, Mr. Speaker.
Lots of words, lots of bluster, no answers. Word of warning. Word of warning, Prime Minister. That's not going to work with the police. I'll tell him why they're putting taxes up. Low growth. In the decade of Tory government before the pandemic, growth slumped.
I think everybody in this country can see that we've been through the biggest pandemic since for 100 years, that we've looked after the people of this country to the tune of £400 billion, that we've put into furlough and all the other schemes, 11.7 million people protected. Everybody knows the cost of that, Mr. Speaker. And at the same time, in spite of all the difficulties that we have faced, we have now got the fastest growth in the G7. Absolutely true.
Under this government, we've seen a pandemic of waste and fraud. From the Prime Minister's yacht to government contracts for mates of ministers, they've treated taxpayers as an ATM machine for their mates and their lifestyles. Now we find, Mr. Speaker, they've written off £8.7 billion on PPA, and the Chancellor's writing off £4.3 billion in fraud.
Of course, we despise fraud and those who steal from the taxpayer, and that's why we've already recovered £743 million in lost furlough money, Mr. Speaker, £2.2 billion that was stolen in bounce-back loans, and we will go on. But I have to tell you, Mr. Speaker, that I am proud of what this government and this country did in securing record quantities of PPE and record time, Mr. Speaker, in furloughing and looking after the entirety of British business and society.
Fiery exchanges there at Prime Minister's questions, and we'll come back to Susan Hume a little later on in the programme, because we're off to Holyrood now to find out what's been happening in the Scottish Parliament with our correspondent there, Lindsay Bewes. Hello to you, Lindsay. Scottish Labour have been challenging Nicola Sturgeon over what's being done to address pressures on the cost of living, keeping with that theme that we just saw there to some extent at PMQs. This was at First Minister's questions. What happened?
Yeah, similar to the UK party, Scottish Labour has also focused on the cost of living in recent weeks. They see that as important and fertile ground for them politically. And at First Minister's questions, Anna Sarwar, the Scottish Labour leader, used his time to raise the issue of rising energy prices coming after that news that millions will have to pay an extra £700 on their bills from April. He was raising this with Nicola Sturgeon, pressing her for more information on what the Scottish Government is going to do to tackle this area within their devolved powers.
They have refused to use the powers of this Parliament to top up winter fuel payments. They have refused to back Labour's proposals on a windfall tax on energy companies. And they have refused to stop rises to rail fares and water charges. The SNP siding with the Tories and big energy companies. Labour on the side of hard-pressed Scots. People are struggling right now. When will the First Minister stop commenting on the cost of living crisis and start doing something about it?
I am not opposed to oil and gas companies making a contribution because their profits are rising. I am not opposed to that. I'm simply saying these approaches should be fair and equitable. That is the point I'm making. And I'm also making the basic point that I don't have the power over that. If Anna Sarwar wants to join me to demand these powers to come to the Scottish Parliament, then we might make some progress. But on the issue of what the Scottish Government can do, again, I'm telling Anna Sarwar things here that I'm sure, I certainly hope he knows. We've actually acted ahead of other governments to try to deal with the cost of living crisis, and particularly the energy cost crisis. The Winter Support Fund I spoke about a moment ago that we have recently established, £41 million in total, £10 million to help people who are struggling to pay fuel bills, including access to top-up vouchers, better support for those in remote and rural areas, £6 million for third sector partners so that they can support directly low-income families, £25 million of flexible funding to help local authorities support people in financial insecurity. So we've already acted ahead of other governments. If there are consequentials coming to us as a result of the Chancellor's announcements today, we will take further action, and we will continue to look across our budgets to make sure that we are maximising the support we give.
Now, you heard there the First Minister challenged on whether she would support a windfall tax for the oil and gas industry. That is a power reserved to Westminster, but Anna Sarwar was saying that her MPs at Westminster had failed to back a Labour motion calling for that to be brought in. Now, oil and gas is, of course, an important industry, particularly in the north of Scotland, and the Scottish Government is in that tricky position of ensuring that it backs an industry that is providing many jobs in that part of Scotland, while also ensuring that if they are profiting from this rise in prices, they are contributing to the public purse. And also confirmation from Nicola Sturgeon that any money that comes to Scotland as a result of the Chancellor's announcements on rising energy costs will be used to help those who are struggling with their bills.
Now, on a completely different subject, there's been an important announcement from the Scottish Government this week confirming that school exams will go ahead, but with extra support and what's being called generous grading. What's the plan?
Yes, that's right. Exams are going to go ahead after 2 years of the pandemic when they haven't taken place, and the Scottish Government has now given details of its plan to support pupils in their revision. Now, in essence, that is going to be some advice on which topics to revise and the provision of study guides as well. And it's also going to be that more generous grading, so boundaries for grades that hit the mark between the pre-pandemic levels and last year's levels as well. And the appeals process is also going to be free. Now, there had been controversy over the handling of how grades were decided in the last couple of years, and the Scottish Conservatives have really been pushing the government for detail on what's going to happen this year.
These plans are too little, too late. Recent reports have outlined that 80% of pupils still do not have a digital device, despite the Scottish Government outlining their online support plans. In addition, many will feel that starting revision support in March will be far too late, especially for those who are catching up on lost schooling. Cabinet Secretary, the Scottish Government has had 2 years to get this right, and we are heading for yet another disaster. Pupils and teachers deserve better than what is being offered today.
I feel we're having a bit of a Groundhog Day, Presiding Officer, going around some of the discussions that we had last time. But at the end of the Conservative debate, and I'm going to quote again from Sharon Dowie, and I know Mr Kerr didn't like this when the First Minister said it, but I think this is very important because it testifies where we're at. The safety of our children is the most paramount thing. Surely the member agrees, Cocab Stewart asked Sharon Dowie. No, I don't agree. And that, I'm afraid, is where we are at with this. It is shameful.
Mr. Kerr, that is enough. Cabinet Secretary.
It is our firm intention, of course, that exams will go ahead. Just like every single other member in the UK, we have a contingency if public health guidance does not allow for gatherings to take place. England, Wales, Northern Ireland have exactly the same contingency in place.
Now, exams to go ahead, but you heard the Education Secretary, Shirley-Ann Somerville, addressing the caveat there that they will go ahead if it's safe to do so. So the government here is still giving itself that bit of room to manoeuvre if the public health situation regarding the pandemic does change before pupils go ahead and sit those exams.
Yes, indeed, Lindsay. Now, of course, the Downing Street parties, which have very much dominated Westminster politics, have also been a huge issue elsewhere, as we've discussed, and they came up in Scotland in the context of the debate on independence. Tell us why.
They certainly did, yes. Nicola Sturgeon does have that goal to hold a second independence referendum by the end of 2023, pandemic permitting, she has always said. And we're now starting to see, as we come out from that really acute phase of the pandemic related to the Omicron variant, we've seen the restrictions go in that regard. We're now starting to see the debate over independence and Scotland's constitutional future really fire up once again. And partygate is now being taken by the SNP and really used as part of its arguments towards independence.
This week's Sue Gray's report, it said that the parties that the Prime Minister and his colleagues put on were difficult to justify, and there were failures in leadership and judgment from within Number 10 and the Cabinet Office. And that's before the Met judges whether there was any criminality involved. So therefore, does the First Minister therefore agree with me? Does the First Minister therefore agree with me that, as the SNP and Scottish Green Party manifestos offered, that it's time to deliver on what the people voted for, have a referendum, win that referendum and then deliver our independence from a wretched and certainly seemingly corrupt Westminster?
Any political party in this chamber that was confident in their arguments around independence would not be desperate to deny the people of Scotland the right to make that choice. And the alternative to independence is to continue to be governed by parties at Westminster that we don't vote for. And right now that is by a disreputable, discredited government and a Prime Minister, frankly, with no integrity, no shame and no moral compass. A Prime Minister that even Douglas Ross doesn't think is fit for office. Scotland can do better than that, and with independence we will do better than that.
Of course, the UK government has said that it won't give the powers to Scotland to hold a second referendum in the way that the first referendum was held in 2014. And not surprising at all that there is strong pushback here from the Scottish Conservatives and from Scottish Labour as well. Both those parties saying the SNP should be focusing its energies on pandemic recovery instead.
Lindsay Bewes, thank you. Lindsay there at Holyrood in Edinburgh. Susan, back to you. And let's talk about something else that's been happening this week in Westminster. We saw there in the headlines Michael Gove, the Levelling Up Secretary, finally publishing a plan, a white paper for precisely that cornerstone issue. What does it involve?
Yeah, and of course, you can't forget that 2 years ago, Boris Johnson swept into Downing Street with an 80-odd majority, having taken all those seats off Labour in those quite deprived, often Northern English places that were really won over by his vision of a brighter future. Well, this is the first step into fulfilling those promises. So there was lots of ambitions to improve education, services like broadband, devolving power to local regions and all these improvements by 2030. A lot of ambition there from Michael Gove. The opposition, as you might imagine, had a few cavils at it, mainly where's the money for it?
And this country won't achieve its full potential until every individual and community achieves everything of which they're capable. Our economy has been like a jet propelled by only one engine. Now we need to fire up every resource we have. And the economic prize from levelling up is potentially enormous. If underperforming places were levelled up towards the UK average, unlocking their full potential, it could boost aggregate UK GDP by tens of billions of pounds each year. This white paper lays out a long-term economic and social plan to make opportunity more equal. It shifts power and opportunity towards the North and Midlands, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. It demonstrates that this people's government is keeping faith with the working people of this country by allowing them to take back control of their lives, their communities and their futures.
After all the delays, all the slogans, all the big promises, is this it? Is this really it? The sum total of our ambition for our coastal and industrial towns, our villages and our great cities is a history lesson on the rise of the Roman Empire. A minister scurrying around Whitehall, shuffling the deck chairs, cobbling together a shopping list of recycled policies and fiddling the figures. Is this really it? For some of us, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is personal. We've lived these failures every single day. We've watched good jobs go, our high streets boarded up, young people who have to get out to get on.
I don't think I heard a single question, nor did I hear her disagree with a single policy that we put forward. So she is in distinguished company. She joins other Labour colleagues who've welcomed the white paper.
I am really concerned that there is very little concern in this document when it comes to levelling up the rural parts of our country. In Cumbria, we have 3-hour round trips for cancer treatment, a threat to our local A&E department, and the fact that our villages and communities are being cleared by second homes and Airbnb.
We've suffered Tory cuts of nearly 200 million. Tinkering with our governance alone won't change a thing. The Secretary of State once praised policies that, in his own words, led to the happy South stamping over the cruel, dirty, toothless face of the Northerner. Is he proud that he's managed to do exactly the same again today?
I think that South Shields does deserve better, and that's why we're going to work with the Mayor north of Tyne in order to make sure that across our Tyneside, both north and south, we have the right structures and the right investment in place.
Michael Gove defending the government's levelling up plan. Thank you, Susan, for now. We'll come back to you a little later. Let's catch up with Cemlyn Davis, our correspondent in Cardiff at the Welsh Parliament. Cemlyn, as we saw in the headlines, there was a heated row this week at First Minister's questions about the funding to make coal tips safe. What's the background to this?
Yes, this has been a long-running issue, Joe, since Storm Dennis caused a landslip from an abandoned coal tip in the Rhondda Valleys almost exactly 2 years ago now. Since then, there's been real debate over how all these old coal tips, hundreds of them across South Wales, can be made safe, and crucially, who should be paying for that work. The UK government says that this is a devolved issue and that the Welsh government has the money to do it, but ministers here say this issue predates devolution and that the UK government have to accept their share of the responsibility. Well, on Tuesday, the leader of the Welsh Conservative group here, Andrew R.T. Davis, said that money the Welsh government had pumped into Cardiff Airport, which it owns, could and should have been redirected towards dealing with this issue instead.
That is money that you chose to put into another project which could have been used to make coal tips safe in the valleys. Exactly. So, First Minister, given the substantial increase, well, I can see you laughing, First Minister, but there are many communities in the valleys who look at this as a nightmare situation for them and cannot sleep at night. So you might chuckle standing in this chamber, First Minister, but it's not a laughing matter. You have the responsibility. Well, there's no need to bite back, First Minister. You have the responsibility. You have the responsibility. You had the money and you had the choices to do it. Why haven't you done it?
The UK government has a responsibility to put right the legacy that we have seen here in Wales, and they have refused to provide a single penny piece. That is the truth of the matter. No nonsense about airport money being spent on coal tip remediation will disguise the fact that the responsibility for putting right the legacy that we see in Wales, with all the history that we have here in Wales, with all the fear that that engenders in valley communities, it relies on a UK Conservative government, and the answer they give is there's not a penny piece to help.
Well, Andrew Davies disputed that final point from the First Minister, and in fact he accused Mark Drakeford of misleading the Senedd. Now, unlike in the Commons, there are no rules here to prevent an MS from accusing another politician of misleading. And Andrew Davies was making the point that the UK government had in fact made money available to help with this issue in the past. But the First Minister said that no, the money that had come from the UK government had been to deal with the immediate emergency work that was required in the aftermath of Storm Dennis, not to deal with this long-term programme now of repairing old coal tips.
Yes, certainly heated exchanges there between the two of them. Just a moment ago, Cemlyn, we discussed the UK government's levelling up plan, and there's been reaction to that too in the Senedd.
Yes, ministers in Westminster have said, haven't they, that they want to iron out inequalities across the UK, including here in Wales. And several Welsh projects have been told that they'll be getting money through the Levelling Up Fund. Now, the Welsh Government says that Wales will still be £1 billion worse off compared to when we were in the European Union because of the funding that would come from Europe to help with regeneration projects in Wales. The UK government disputes that, but that figure of £1 billion was raised by one Plaid Cymru MS as he responded to this levelling up announcement.
We learned, of course, this week that despite an explicit promise by the Prime Minister that Wales wouldn't be a penny worse off from leaving the EU, we find that Westminster is pocketing £1 billion worth of money that should be coming to Wales. So do you agree with me, Minister, that the more the Westminster government breaks its promises, the more it breaks up the United Kingdom?
Yes, I do. I agree fully with that. And I think that every time the UK government makes a promise to Wales and to the people of Wales which it doesn't keep, it does risk the breakup of the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom has to be a group of nations where we have mutual respect and where we treat each other with equality. And we don't have that at the moment. That's not to say that the UK government can't today make changes in that respect and change its approach to the United Kingdom.
Well, Michael Gove said on Wednesday that he wants to work with the Welsh Government and the other devolved administrations in order to raise living standards. The Welsh Government has welcomed that tone, but says that actions will speak louder than words.
You've also been looking at a debate about possible changes to the school day in Wales. What's the plan?
Yes, the Education Minister says that now is the time to look again at the school day and also the school calendar, which has been unchanged for around 150 years. Jeremy Miles says that the pandemic has forced the government to look again at things and has presented an opportunity as well to possibly modernise things. And a trial now is underway to extend the school day in parts of Wales. This is what he told MSs on Tuesday.
13 schools and 1 college from 5 local authorities have volunteered to take part in the trial, and more than 1,800 learners will benefit from a further 5 hours a week of additional enrichment sessions around the school day, including sports and arts, social activities, well-being support and academic programmes. We know from research that there can be gains in attainment as well as improved attendance, confidence and well-being from this kind of approach, especially for our disadvantaged learners.
Well, the opposition parties say that at the moment, at least, they're prepared to look at these ideas and they're open to finding out how this trial works out. But the teaching unions are more concerned. NAHT Cymru, for example, say that there's no evidence to back up this idea of extending the school day, and they're also worried about what this might mean for teachers' workload.
Cemlyn Davies there, thank you, at the Welsh Parliament, the Senedd. Let's go to Stormont and speak to our reporter Jim Fitzpatrick. And it won't be an understatement to say it's been a dramatic week in Northern Irish politics.
Yes, Joe. The DUP First Minister, Paul Givan, has resigned. The party has pulled him out of the executive because of their ongoing protests at the operation of the Northern Ireland Protocol. Earlier in the week, we had the DUP Minister, Edmund Poots, ordering the end of checks on goods coming from Britain to Northern Ireland as part of the protocol measures. And now with this latest move, it means that there's no head of government, because with the resignation of the First Minister also goes the Deputy First Minister from Sinn Féin. However, because of changes in legislation coming through at Westminster, it means that other ministers remain in post. And it's thought that legislation that has already made it into the Assembly and has a chance of passing before the election still has that same chance. So there's greater uncertainty, greater tension around, but we'll be watching things unfold over the next few weeks.
Let's turn to what's been happening inside the Assembly now, because there are not one but two climate change bills under discussion. What's been going on?
Yes, we had one climate change bill from the Minister, Edmund Poots, and another put forward as a private member's bill by the Green Party leader, Claire Bailey. So what happened this week was that a number of the parties got together with the Greens to put an amendment to the Minister's bill that would increase the target and make his bill more ambitious. Here's Claire Bailey outlining why she sees the issue as one of great urgency.
It's about securing a future for ourselves, for our children and for our grandchildren. It's about setting the framework and creating systems that will be fit for the future. So I urge this House to please decide wisely. If you want to sleep at night and look your grandchildren in the eye, be confident that you told them that you did everything possible with the privilege that you hold. Thank you.
I wish he had done it sooner, but I do welcome the fact that the Minister and the Department has brought forward climate legislation. That doesn't mean that it could not be better, and I hope through amendments today and tomorrow that we not only move to a step closer to having an historic climate bill, but one that we can all be proud of. Yep.
Member for giving way, and I have to say, I listened to his arguments in relation to the science. Obviously, the member's more interested in the optics, because when he went to COP in Glasgow, he used his bicycle. However, I suspect he used his car to come here today. So political opportunism won't save farms in Northampton.
So an amendment which increases the net zero target in the Minister's original bill and puts a net zero target by 2050 for Northern Ireland was passed. The Minister himself was not happy with that outcome.
The decision yesterday is more likely to cause more emissions on a global scale, because it will reduce efficient farming in Northern Ireland, which is already farming at a lower carbon intensity than most of its competitors, and lead to that carbon being produced in higher intensity farms across other parts of the world. It will drive jobs from the Northern Ireland economy, and it will drive families from the farms that has been in their names for generations. And again, I say to people who supported this, in view of all the lobbying that was carried out by the agricultural community, should hang their heads in shame.
So this new target will, of course, only matter if the bill does become law. And while there is greater uncertainty around that, it is still likely that the bill will pass.
And we've also had a statement from the Justice Minister about the conditions inside prisons in Northern Ireland. What did she say?
Well, this was her response to a review that she had commissioned that had found significant concerns in the treatment of prisoners. So she opened her statement to the Assembly with an apology to prisoners.
I have no hesitation in apologising to those prisoners who did not receive the level of engagement this report identifies as the minimum standard expected. In reading this entire report and the numerous others published in recent years, members will see that prison service has a willingness to learn and a determination to drive continuous improvement. This report sets out some significant challenges. However, in delivering the recommendations in this report, the prison service will be better, as will be the experiences of those committed to our care. Thank you.
And thank the Minister. I want to call the Chairperson of the Committee for Justice, Mervyn Storey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Minister and the Director-General for the time that they took this morning to discuss the report and the reassurances that were given. Also to thank the Chief Inspector for the time that she took yesterday to brief ourselves in regards to the report. And I welcome the comments in the Minister's statement recognising the significant transformation that has taken place in our prisons since 2011.
So business continues at Stormont for now. Joe, for how long, I can't say for sure. It may be a little bit cold and blustery out here, but the political temperature this week has gone up a notch or two.
Yes, plenty for you to be observing over the coming days. Thank you very much. Jim Fitzpatrick there at Stormont. Susan, we've got time to bring our viewers one more important story from Westminster, and this is a plan to try and tackle rising energy bills. It was announced by the Chancellor. What did he say?
Yes, he came along to offer some help because even some mild weather, milder than we were seeing in Stormont there, is not going to help us with some pretty huge rises in our household energy bills coming along. Now, a lot of us have seen rises in our bills already because we've been protected by this cap that there is on our bills. However, that can't go on forever because our energy firms are having to buy the energy that they sell to us on the international markets, and the prices have absolutely shot up there. So come April, that ceiling that we've had is going to be raised quite a lot. So there's going to be, for the average household, an extra £700 nearly on the annual bill. And that really is quite a staggering increase. So the Chancellor came along to say the government would step in to take, as he put it, the sting out of it. So it has a number of things on offer. There's going to be £200 off the bills for everyone, something that we'll have to pay back over future years when hopefully bills will have gone down, and also money off council tax for some households in England.
For me to stand here and pretend we don't have to adjust to paying higher prices would be wrong and dishonest. But what we can do is take the sting out of a significant price shock for millions of families by making sure the increase in prices is smaller initially and spread over a longer period. Mr. Speaker, without government intervention, the increase in the price cap would leave the average household having to find an extra £693.
This energy crisis has not happened overnight. It's a decade of dither and delay from the party opposite that has brought us to this point. A decade of failure to regulate our energy market. A decade in which they have slashed our gas storage capacity, leaving us more reliant than ever on Russia for our gas imports. A decade of failure to make the most of solar, tidal and wind energy.
Could the Chancellor tell me his approach in increasing national insurance contributions and then handing money back to different people through rebates and discounts, is that a Conservative approach or a socialist approach?
Well, Mr. Speaker, with the greatest respect for my honourable friend, I also believe that it is a Conservative approach to be responsible with this nation's public finances.
Current data suggests that over 8,000 households in Vauxhall are already living in fuel poverty now, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So what does the Chancellor have to say to my constituents who are already unable to make ends meet now and who are facing a hike of over £700 in their energy bills?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, what I can tell them is they won't have to wait until October, as the party opposite's proposals would have had them do. They will receive £150 in April, Mr. Speaker.
That will be an issue that continues to be at the forefront of millions of voters' minds. That's all we've got time for this week. I will be back on Monday at 12:15 with more Politics Live. Do join me then. Until then, have a lovely weekend.